If you're finding it challenging to make progress in your practice time, I'm going to give you an approach that you can use each and every week to make real progress. Hello and welcome to the Musician Toolkit, episode number 46. My name is David Lane. I'm your host, and it is great to be with you once again. Well, we're just about in the home stretch for 2023. Last 2 months of the year, we want to make them count, want to make as much progress as we can. Sometimes we start thinking, hey, looking forward to January getting here so that I can do my New Year's resolutions and make 2024 the year that I get all of these things accomplished in my life that I want to. But I want to tell you that November 2023 is just as good of a starting time as January 2024. And you will thank yourself later on if you look back and say, I didn't have to wait till January to start doing things that mattered and made a difference. I started in November. Or maybe you've been doing pretty well for a while, but you feel like you need to kind of pick things up just a bit. So it's been a little while since we've had a practice-specific episode, and I have a single tip for you today. It's something that I use a lot in my piano lessons, something that I find to be very helpful, and it's called the 5x5 approach to practice. It's probably been close to a decade now since I saw this workout video, or maybe it might have been a blog. It's been a long time ago. But it was a fitness guy that I followed, and I still follow. And he had a workout that he called 5x5. And what he did was he took 5 challenging body weight exercises, and he recommended doing 5 sets of 5 reps. So you have 5 exercises that you do in the workout. You do 5 sets of each one, and then you do that 4 more times so that you've gone through each exercise 5 times, 5 reps of each exercise. And one of the things that I remember from my own piano background, from my own education, was one of my teachers saying, if you can do something 5 times correctly in a row, you've probably learned it. Now, is that scientific? Is there something magical about the number 5? Is that even always true, that 5 is all you need? No. But 5 is a small number. It's very manageable, and it's something that we can, of course, remember very easily. So when you're trying to plan how you're going to practice something, how much you're going to spend on it, kind of keeping a simple number like 5, that's probably less daunting, than something like 25 or 20 or 21. And while there may not be anything scientific that's been proven to doing something 5 times in a row in the manner that I'm going to suggest and having a huge benefit, I do think there is a huge benefit because it gets you to focus. It gets you to think about something specific. And in time, what I hope that you will do is to adapt what kind of task you're fitting into this 5x5 approach. Because if you do it correctly, it's something that's a little challenging, or maybe it's a lot challenging, but you're not doing that much of it. So to reiterate what I've always held as a musician, and that is that if you can do something 5 times correctly, you've probably learned it. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have, but that's a good first step. But I would further add that if you can do something 5 times in a row correctly and continue to do that every day until you've done it for 5 consecutive days, then you should really have it down. You've done it 25 times, and you've done it with focus. And this is going to go a long way. It doesn't sound like a lot, 25 times practicing something, or 5 times and then doing that for 5 days. It sounds like I'm asking too little. But let's go over the rules because they're actually quite demanding. What we are asking for is a very high standard of practice. We're just not asking for you to do it for a very long period of time. So here are, of course, the 5 rules. Rule number 1, whatever you practice, do it 5 times in a row correctly. So this is just a good first step. Number 2, correctly means 100% accuracy. If you missed one finger or one note, it was not correct. So rule number 3, if you mess up, the count starts over. So you're practicing something for 4 times without a mistake, and then you miss a fingering on the 5th attempt. Sorry, you have to start all over. So it's getting a little tough now. It's not just 5 times in a row correctly, but you can forgive yourself if you mess up. No, you mess up, you start over. It has to be 5 clean takes in a row. So that's harder than maybe you thought. So rule number 4, this means that accuracy and precision are by far the most important things. Speed does not matter at all. Go absolutely as slow as you need. And then the 5th rule is repeat 5 days in a row. And marvel how easier it gets each time you do it. Speed will come without effort. A lot of times the speed we're looking for in our playing is simply the subconscious grasping what you've been feeding it. And, the subconscious sends instructions to your fingers, to your hands, to your voice, anything that you're using as a musician. Your subconscious sends it there much, much, much faster than your conscious. Basically a shortcut wiring going from your subconscious to the skills that you need. But I want to elaborate on something that I said, regarding especially rule number 3, and that is if you mess up, the count starts over. So you're going to find it very important that when you're working on this type of practice, that you're giving yourself a manageable bite. That is to say, if you're trying to do this for 8 measures or 16 measures, like a whole section of music, this is probably a very demanding approach. But if you're trying to get a pattern that occurs in 1 or 2 measures, well, that's a little bit more manageable. So let's talk about some ways to incorporate 5x5 practice. So the first thing is to take any challenging technique. It could be a new scale or chord progression, or it could be, not necessarily new, but a scale that you've worked on for a while, but it's just not coming along. I mean, I could say, F sharp harmonic minor. It took a while before it was anywhere near as comfortable as C major, and truthfully, it's still not as comfortable, but I can play it as well as I need. But there was a point where that scale was way behind. So you take any technique that you want, but limit yourself to one. Limit it to one key, one type of technique, one type of chord progression, whatever it is, and practice it as slowly as needed. You just want to ensure that every note you play is correct, no matter how slow. Do it 5 times in a row. Now, my recommendation is that you don't allow it to speed up for the first 2 days of this. Keep it slow. Make it stay slow. Even if you feel like, hey, I'm getting better at this. I think I could go faster. Don't. Keep it slow. On days 3 and 4, allow it to gradually speed up with each repetition. This is the way I like to think about things getting faster. Not that I'm pushing it, not like I have a car and I'm pushing it on level ground, but that I have a car facing downhill, but early on I'm super cautious. I keep the brake on. I barely let it up. But as I get more confidence, I let the brake up more and allow the vehicle to gain more speed. And that's what I'm doing when I'm practicing, when I'm trying to get faster. So think about restraint early on, those first 2 days. And then days 3 and 4 is ease off the brake. Allow it to go as faster, closer to the tempo you want. So in theory, if you're doing that, day 5, it should be feeling easy. So get your 5 times in carefully and then test yourself for speed. Another way you could incorporate 5x5 practice is to take a particularly difficult portion of a piece that you're working on and practice the very end of the section 5 times. Like the very end might be the last chord, it might be the last 2 beats, it might be the last measure. And then work back 1 measure to get into it and play it all the way to the end, and do that 5 times. Keep doing that until you're starting from the beginning of a section. So I said, you might not want to do this with like an 8-measure section, but you could, if you're taking the practice time you need, to take each step 5 times in a row. Now remember, it must always be correct. And you need to do this 5 days in a row. Because you're going to feel like after the first day, if not the first day, definitely the second day, you're going to feel like you're making progress. But commit to this. If it was something that you needed to work on, give it 5 days in a row. And by the way, we didn't talk about that. We talked about how the count starts over if you make a mistake when you're practicing 5 times in a row. But the count also starts over if you miss a day. If you break the streak of 5 days in a row, you got to start over. See, what makes this so effective is we just don't do this that much. How often do you take time to practice something 5 times in a row, making sure that you did it correctly, completely, 5 times in a row? And then how many times have you successfully done that, committed to doing that, 5 days in a row without fail? So you can do this with a 1-measure section, 2-measure section, 8-measure section, but you add it up and you have this series of 5 times. So basically it's like stage 1, 5 times in a row correctly. You've got that. Go add a measure, do that 5 times in a row correctly. Add another measure, do it 5 times in a row correctly. Here's another way that I suggest using it. If you're working on getting better at reading notes on a staff, and by the way, I know I'm talking to some college students here. It could be that, hey, your treble and bass clef, but you're in a theory class and now you have to learn alto clef. So, use this, apply this in the same way. As I've mentioned multiple times, I recommend musictheory.net for a lot of things, but especially for their note identification exercise. So you go there, you go to the settings, the customization, and you change the settings so that you're working only on the notes you're trying to learn at the moment, only in the clefs you're trying to focus on. One of the things about musictheory.net, in their exercises, they have what's called a challenge mode. So you can set a limit for 5 minutes, reset the score, and just practice for 5 minutes and see how many did you get correct. That's your score for the day. How many notes did you correctly name in 5 minutes? So do another 5-minute session for each of the next 4 days. And see if the number of notes you can correctly identify, see if that will go up. Now, what if you do this exactly as I recommended? You did it 5 times in a row correctly, no mistakes. And you successfully did that 5 days in a row. But it still has issues. It's still not nearly as good as you'd like it. Maybe it got better, but you're a long way from getting to where you want it to be. Well, you can probably guess what my suggestion would be. Do it again. Do the same thing again. Go through another round of 5 by 5. Maybe you take a day or 2 off in between, but do it again. Go back over it. In fact, maybe your next challenge might be, if you think it's really something tricky, something you want to nail, can you do this for 5 weeks in a row? Can you take your 5 times a day times 5 days and do that times 5 weeks? The other thing is, maybe look at what you were trying to do and were you trying to do too much? So I've said that probably 3 times now. Is your goal compatible with this exercise? There are challenging portions of certain pieces that 5 times a day times 5 days, that would not nearly be enough. And by the way, another variation that I personally use sometimes is I will take a section and I will do it in sets of 5 times in a row correctly. So I'll do it 5 times in a row correctly with the idea that I will not speed it up at all. And then I'll do it 5 more times where I think only about the dynamics. I've got the rhythm and I've got it and I'm still keeping it slow. And then I'll do it another 5 times in a row and I'm focusing on now speeding it up a little bit. So I might do 3 sets of 5. I might do 4 sets of 5. Again, it's not a magical number, but it's a number that I happen to like It's an easier standard to achieve than like trying to do 17 times in a row correctly in one sitting, but it's demanding enough that you have to pay attention. Could you imagine that you're trying to do 17 times in a row correctly and you do the first 16 fine and then you mess up number 17? How demoralizing that is. If you're trying to do 5 times in a row correctly and you mess up after 4, your thought is, "Oh man, I got to do this again." But then you're like, but it's just 5 times. I can do it. It's not asking a lot, and it's something that you can easily repeat. And the thing is that it doesn't have to be the sole part of your practice. It's a portion of what you're doing. And if you're doing it the way that I'm thinking, I can't imagine that you're spending more than 5 minutes total per day on this. Now, I guess that's if you do it well. It might take, up to 10 minutes if you're allotting for mistakes early on, or, attempts that don't go so well. So use your imagination when applying this technique, this 5x5 technique. It works because it demands perfection first and repetition second. So you want to be patient early on. You will undoubtedly mess up and have to start over your count. Kind of expect that. Getting 5 times in a row is going to be correctly is going to be harder than you think at first. And it's going to feel like it's actually taking forever. However, you will eventually get good at this type of practice, and you'll see it nothing more than just a tool that will reliably make you a better musician. If this episode helped you at all, would you please share it with another musician who could also use this help by sharing the link for this episode on whatever podcast app you're listening to, or the YouTube link if you're on YouTube. It's been a while since I've asked, but it would be great to have some more 5-star ratings and maybe a new review. So if you're so inclined on your podcast app, especially if that happens to be Apple or Spotify, I would love if you would take time to do that. And this is the part where I tell you about fonts. I just want to tell you, this is just personal. I don't know what about the app will help you, but I am about to change my policies for my students. And for it to work, I need some of the automated features that come with fonts. I have a handful of students that are not on the Fonts app, that they're doing an old school way. And it's more challenging the way I want to now handle payments and makeups. It's very easy on the Fonts app. If you want to play around with the Fonts app, it's free for, I believe it's a 2-week free trial, but you can check for sure. Click the link in the show notes if it's going to cost money right away, or it doesn't look like something's for you, just back out. No harm. I don't think I've ever seen a Fonts app in my Facebook or Instagram feed, so they're not going to hound you everywhere for going to that webpage. But use the link in my show notes and see if it's right for you, if you're a teacher of any kind. So I want to say thank you so much for listening, and I'll be back with you again next week.